Forget everything Kody Brown ever said about being a father. Forget the confessionals, forget the speeches about commitment, about plural family, about doing something hard because it is right. Forget all of it. Instead, watch what he did in the moments he forgot the camera was still on. Watch the micro-expressions. Watch the redirects. Watch the impatience that surfaces for just a half second before the performance kicks back in and covers it. Because that right there is where the real story of Kody Brown and his daughter Truly has always lived. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If this is your first time on this channel, hit like and subscribe right now, because what we do here is not recap. What we do here is read the footage. And this one is going to change how you watch every scene they ever shared on camera. Now, let's go back before we go forward, because this story does not start with a villain. And that matters. That matters a lot. Actually, because the most uncomfortable version of this conversation is not the one where Kody Brown was always cold, always checked out, always performing fatherhood rather than practicing it. That version is too easy. It lets too many people off the hook, including the audience, including the production, and including, in some ways, Kody himself. The uncomfortable version is this. He was not always that man. If you go back to the early seasons of Sister Wives, and I mean genuinely early, the Lehi, Utah era, before the movies, before the fractures started showing in ways the show could not edit around, there are real moments of warmth in that archive. Kody Brown with young children, physically present, genuinely engaged. The kind of playful energy that reads as authentic precisely because it has not yet been calculated. Those moments existed. They are documented, and they are important to this conversation not because they redeem what came after they do not, but because they prove something critical. What came after was a choice, not an accident, not a personality flaw that was always there and simply became more visible over time. A documented, time-stamped, season-by-season choice about where to direct attention, where to invest emotional energy, and most revealingly, whose needs were allowed to land as real inside a conversation, and whose needs were quietly, consistently redirected into a discussion about something else entirely. That redirection is the thing I want to talk about today, because it is the behavior that most people have not named precisely enough, and naming it precisely is the entire point of this video. Here's what the redirection looks like in practice. Christine Brown is in a conversation with Kody. She raises something about Truly, a specific need, a specific emotional response Truly is having. Something that requires Kody to actually think about his youngest daughter as an individual, with an interior life that is separate from the family narrative he is managing. And within somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, depending on the scene, the conversation is no longer about Truly. It is about Kody's feelings about Christine raising the issue. It is about what the raising of the issue implies about Kody's commitment. It is about the broader family dynamic, the plural structure, the difficulty of his situation, the ways he is misunderstood. Truly, the actual child who was the actual subject of the conversation is gone. She has been replaced by Kody's emotional experience of being asked about her. Now, I want you to do something. I want you to go back through any multi-wife season of this show and count how many times that specific pattern plays out. Christine starts a sentence about Truly's needs. You count where that sentence ends up. Not what Kody says he feels about Truly. Not his stated intentions. Where does the conversation actually land? Whose need is being centered by the time the scene concludes? Count it. Because when you count it, it stops being an impression. It becomes a pattern. And patterns are not editing choices. Patterns are behavior. This brings us to something Kody Brown leaned on consistently across the run of this series. And it is worth examining directly because it is so central to how his self-image was constructed on camera. He referenced his 18 children the way other people reference their professional accomplishments. It appeared in confessionals, it appeared in interviews, it appeared in the kind of offhand remarks that are meant to signal identity without requiring justification. 18 children. The implication being, look at the scale of this commitment. Look at what this life has produced. But here's the thing about that framing that the show never pushed back on hard enough. Children are not achievements. Having children is not a credential. Real fathering, the kind that actually shapes a human being's development, their sense of safety, their understanding of their own worth, fathering is a daily practice. It is thousands of ordinary moments. It is the quality of your attention when your child is not performing for you, when they are just being a person in a room with you and needing you to be a person back. The gap between Kody Brown's self-narrative as a father and what the documented footage actually shows is the most significant unexamined story in the entire run of Sister Wives. And truly Brown is the clearest, most heartbreaking, most undeniable evidence of that gap. Let me describe a scene for you. This is season 16. It is documented, it is fan time-stamped, it has been discussed in corners of the fandom, but it has never received the kind of direct, frame-by-frame analysis it deserves. Christine attempts to bring up Truly's emotional response to the family situation, and at this point in the series, the family situation is fracturing in ways that are not subtle. And Truly is a child who is living inside that fracture and responding to it the way children respond to fractures, by feeling things that need to be received by a parent. What happens in this scene is not dramatic. That is actually the point. There is no explosion, no confrontation, no moment that would make a highlight reel. There is just a man, in a space, who makes it clear through every nonverbal signal available to a human being that the conversation he is currently in is an inconvenience. Body language. The timing of the redirect. The way the conversation is allowed to resolve without Truly's actual emotional state ever being addressed. And then the scene ends. And that is that. Life continues. The episode moves forward. And a child who needed her father to be present in that moment, to be attuned to what she specifically was experiencing, got a performance of engagement instead of the real thing. Attunement is the word I want to stay with for a moment, because it is the precise clinical term for what is actually missing in Kody's documented relationship with Truly. And imprecise language has allowed too many people to describe this dynamic without quite capturing what they are seeing. Attunement is not presence. Attunement is not time. Attunement is the capacity to read your specific child's specific emotional state in a specific moment and respond to it in a way that makes the child feel seen. Not managed, not redirected, seen. Behavioral researchers who study parental dynamics in complex family structures, blended families, plural families, step-family arrangements, have consistently identified this finding. When a parental figure develops a primary attachment to one family unit within a larger plural structure, the children in secondary units do not simply receive less time. They receive qualitatively different attention, less attunement, less of that specific capacity to read and respond to what that specific child needs right now. And here is what makes the Sister Wives footage so instructive for anyone interested in this pattern. You can see the attunement difference. It is not hidden. It is sitting there in the footage across multiple seasons, in the confessional language Kody uses when he discusses different children, in the physical behavior captured on camera, in the specificity, or lack of it, with which different children are described as individuals. Kody's attunement to Robyn's children is observable in the footage. His ability to describe their specific personalities, their specific experiences, his specific emotional responses to their specific moments is there. It is detailed. It is the language of a parent who is actually paying attention. The language around Truly is different. Truly appears in categories. She is one of Christine's kids. She is part of the younger children. She is doing well. She is adjusting. The language is general in a way that is not general by accident. Generality, when it comes to describing your own child, is a signal. It is a signal that the specific person of that child has not been the regular subject of your sustained attention. The fandom saw this. It needs to be said clearly. The fandom called this pattern in real time. The term that circulated, Truly erasure, described exactly what behavioral analysis now confirms was happening. A child being discussed in generalities, photographed in group configurations, mentioned as part of categories rather than as an individual with a name that someone will say specifically, with the kind of weight that comes from actually knowing who you are talking about. When that term started circulating roughly around season 14, it was met with the usual dismissals. People read too much into editing choices. Fans who are too invested. The kind of deflection that fandom analysis always receives when it gets uncomfortably close to something the mainstream recap coverage does not want to look at directly. The full series is now available. It can be watched from the beginning with the entire arc visible, and I would ask anyone who dismissed the fandom's early identification of this pattern to go back and watch it with that specific question in mind. Is Truly Brown treated as an individual or as a category? Is she named specifically or referenced generally? Is her interior life ever the final destination of a conversation she is the subject of? Or does every conversation that begins with truly end somewhere else? Watch it, and then come back and tell me the fandom was wrong. Because here is where we are at the end of this first part of the conversation. And we are not finished. Not even close. We have established the pattern. We have named it precisely. We have grounded it in both the documented footage and in what behavioral research tells us about how this kind of selective attunement operates in complex family structures. But there is a layer underneath this that the fandom has not fully examined yet. It has to do with what happened after Christine left. It has to do with the opportunities Kody had with a camera still rolling, with a platform still running, with multiple seasons of airtime still available to address what his youngest daughter experienced. Specifically, individually, with her name said out loud in a way that acknowledged her as a person rather than a storyline. He had those opportunities. What he chose to do with them is the next part of this story. And it is the part that closes the door completely. Stay with me. Part 2 is where this lands. And it lands hard. The second part is starting now. Let's talk about what happens after a family collapses on camera, because there is a specific kind of cruelty that does not announce itself. It does not come with raised voices or dramatic confrontations, or the kind of moment that makes it into a highlight reel. It comes quietly. It comes in the form of what is not said, what is not named, what is consistently, repeatedly, almost surgically left out of a conversation that had every opportunity to include it. After Christine Brown left after the departure that the show had been building toward for seasons, and that anyone paying real attention could see coming long before the production was willing to frame it that way, Kody Brown had something very specific available to him. He had a camera. He had a microphone. He had a platform that millions of people were still watching. And he had a daughter. A specific daughter, a youngest daughter, a child who had grown up inside this television production and who had, across the arc of that production, been watched by an audience that had noticed her presence and noticed increasingly the quality of attention she was, or was not, receiving from her father. The opportunity to address Truly's name specifically, individually, with the kind of weight that comes from accountability rather than performance, that opportunity was not theoretical. It was sitting there, season after season after the collapse, interview after interview, confessional after confessional. And what Kody Brown did with that opportunity is the final, definitive piece of evidence this video has been building toward. He spoke about all his children. He spoke about the family. He spoke about his pain at length, with significant detail, with the kind of emotional availability that was notably absent in documented scenes where a specific child's specific emotional state needed to be received. He spoke about being misunderstood, about the difficulty of his position, about what a plural family asks of a person and how rarely that is acknowledged by the outside world. Truly remained, even in his public grief narrative, a generality, one of Christine's kids who had moved away with her, part of the loss he was processing in the aggregate. A thread in a larger tapestry that Kody Brown preferred to discuss at the level of the tapestry rather than the individual thread. There is a word for this, and it is not a comfortable word to use, but it is the accurate one. The word is avoidance. Not the dramatic, obvious kind of avoidance that announces itself, the quiet, sophisticated, self-protective kind that wraps itself in the language of general grief and general love and general commitment, so effectively that it can pass as presence while functioning as absence. Kody Brown is very skilled at this particular form of avoidance. The footage documents it over and over. He is always in the room, he is rarely actually there. And Truly, who had been in this production since she was small enough that the audience watched her learn to talk, learn to navigate a plural family structure that most children will never have to navigate, learn to be a person inside a situation that no child designs for themselves, Truly had access to the same footage the audience did. Let that land for a moment. Every pattern the fandom identified, every redirect, every scene where her name began a conversation and something else ended it, every confessional where she was referenced in a category rather than named as an individual. She can watch all of it. She will watch all of it if she has not already, and she will recognize herself. Or, more precisely, she will recognize her absence in that footage with a clarity that no audience member, however attentive, can fully approach. Because for her, it is not an analysis. It is her childhood. That is not a dramatic point being made for effect. That is just the reality of what it means to grow up inside a television production. The footage is permanent. It is streamable. It will be there in 20 years. And a young woman who was a child on that screen will always have access to the documented record of how she was and was not seen by her father. Now, I want to address something directly, because this channel does not do this work in order to perform outrage, and it does not make these arguments in order to tell you what to feel. You are capable of feeling things on your own. What this channel does is read the footage with precision and connect what the footage shows to frameworks that help explain why it shows what it shows. And in that spirit, I want to be precise about something important. The argument being made here is not that Kody Brown does not love truly. Love is internal. Love is not accessible to analysis. What the argument is that the footage supports unambiguously is that love without attunement is not sufficient. A child does not experience love as an internal state their parents hold privately. A child experiences love through the quality of attention they receive, through whether their name is said specifically or categorically, through whether a conversation that begins with their need ends with their need or ends somewhere else, through whether the parent across from them is reading them, actually reading them, tracking their specific emotional state in real time, or is performing a version of engagement that satisfies the parent's self-image without actually landing on the child. Truly, Brown's documented experience on this show is the experience of a child who was loved, probably, and who was not sufficiently seen. And those two things can coexist. They coexist all the time in real families, in non-televised households, in relationships that never get analyzed by anyone. The tragedy of Sister Wives is not that it created this dynamic. It is that it documented it in enough detail that the pattern cannot be reasonably denied by anyone willing to look at the evidence honestly. Let's talk about Robin. Because you cannot have this conversation with precision if you are not willing to name the comparison directly. And imprecision here has allowed a lot of people to talk around the most important part of the story without ever quite arriving at it. The footage does not just show Kody's attunement deficit with Truly in isolation. It shows it in contrast. And contrast is where patterns become undeniable. The difference in how Kody Brown discusses Robin's children, the specificity of language, the emotional granularity, the evidence of sustained individual attention versus how he discusses Christine's children, and Truly most specifically, is not subtle once you are looking for it. It is one of the most consistently documented disparities across the entire run of the series. This is not about Robin. Robin Brown is a separate conversation for a separate video, and she has been analyzed on this channel with the same rigor this channel brings to everything. This is about Kody's behavior toward Robin's children. The warmth, the specificity, the visible attunement reveals about the nature of the deficit elsewhere. Because attunement is not a fixed resource that depletes. It is not as though Kody had a limited supply of parental presence and allocated it as fairly as he could across 18 children. Attunement is directional. It follows investment. It follows emotional priority. And the footage shows with painful clarity where Kody Brown's emotional priority lived in the later seasons of this show. Truly did not lose a distracted father. She lost a specifically redirected one. And the distinction matters because distraction is accidental, and redirection is a choice. Now, I said at the end of part 1 that there is a prediction to make, and I am going to make it because this channel's predictions on this series have a documented track record, and the audience that has been with us since the beginning knows that these are not guesses. They are pattern-based projections, and the pattern here is clear enough that what comes next is not difficult to see. Kody Brown will mention Truly on camera again. It may be in a remaining episode, it may be in an interview, it may be in one of the confessional-style formats that this production uses when the main narrative has run out of new architecture. He will mention her in a way that is designed to signal present connection. It will reference something recent. It will be emotionally toned in a way that implies warmth, implies relationship, implies that whatever distance existed has softened or is softening. And it will be general. It will not be the conversation that Truly's documented experience requires. It will not contain the specific acknowledgement of specific moments. It will not name what the footage shows. It will not demonstrate attunement, which, remember, is not about saying the right things, but about showing evidence of having genuinely tracked your child's interior experience over time. It will be a performance of connection that the audience, having watched this series with the attention this series rewards, will recognize immediately for what it is. And Truly, who has watched herself being erased across the seasons of this production, who has access to the same time-stamped footage you do, who is no longer a child who needs the performance to be real in order to feel okay, will recognize it too. That recognition is not angry necessarily. It does not have to be. Anger is one possible response to seeing clearly, but clarity is the primary thing. And clarity, once it arrives, does not require the performance to change. It just means the door is closed quietly, fully, without drama, because there is no longer any version of the performance that the person on the other side of it cannot see through. That is the final scene of this story. Not a confrontation, not a breakdown. Just a young woman who grew up on television, who watched herself being referenced in categories and general statements and aggregate grief narratives, who now sees the footage as clearly as the audience does, and who has, in that seeing, found something that is actually more powerful than anger. She has found the ability to need it to be different, without waiting for it to be. That is what this series has actually documented, across 18 seasons and a plural family structure, and a production that never quite knew what it was capturing, even as it captured it. Not just the collapse of a family, the slow, documented, time-stamped process by which a child learns to see her father clearly, and the moment at which that clarity becomes something she can carry without it destroying her. I want to speak to the audience that has been with SisterWives Crew from the beginning right now. Not the first-time viewer, hello, welcome, please subscribe. You have walked into the deep end, and I hope you brought a floaty. But the people who have been here since we started pulling these threads, you called Truly erasure before it was being called anything. You flagged the attunement differential before anyone in the mainstream SisterWives coverage was willing to use that kind of language. You identified the redirect pattern. You documented the confessional language disparities. You did the frame-by-frame work in the comments and the forums and the threads that nobody in the official recap ecosystem wanted to look at directly. You were right. The full series has now been documented and is available for anyone who wants to go back and check. You were right in real time, which is the hardest kind of right to be, because real time does not give you the benefit of hindsight. You called it while it was happening. That is the mark of an audience that is not just watching. That is an audience that is actually reading, and that matters more than you probably realize. Because the way this show gets discussed in the mainstream, the way any long-running reality series gets discussed, tends to flatten into either defense or attack. Either Kody is a monster, or he is misunderstood. Either Christine is a hero, or she is a victim. Either the plural family was beautiful, or it was a disaster. The binary is comfortable. The binary is easy to produce content around. And the binary misses almost everything that is actually true, and actually interesting, and actually worth the time you spend watching. What this channel has tried to build, from the first video to this one, is something different from the binary. It is the kind of analysis that takes the footage seriously as evidence, that treats the people in it as complex rather than convenient, that asks not just what happened, but why. And not just why in terms of personality, but why in terms of pattern. The repeatable, documentable behavioral pattern that tells you something true about how a person is oriented in the world. Kody Brown is not a monster. He is a man who made a specific set of choices, documented across a specific number of seasons, about where his attention and attunement would go. Those choices had a specific child as their clearest casualty. That child's name is Truly, and she deserved to be the destination of conversations that began with her name. She deserved a father who, when Christine said her name at the start of a sentence, was still thinking about her by the end of it. That is not a complicated standard. It is the baseline. And the baseline is what the footage shows was not reliably met. Now, here's what I want you to do. After this video ends, not during it, after going back and finding any scene where Christine attempts to bring up Truly specifically in a conversation with Kody, it does not matter which season. Pick one. Anyone. And when you find it, I want you to watch Kody's face in the first 3 seconds after Truly's name is said, before he formulates his response, before the performance of engagement kicks in and arranges his expression into something that reads as listening. Watch those 3 seconds, because that window, that brief, unguarded pre-performance window, is where the real information lives. It is the window before a person decides how they want to appear. And what you are going to see in that window, across scene after scene after scene, is not the face of a father being interrupted by a concern about his child. It is not a curiosity. It is not the soft, instinctive orienting of attention that a parent shows when someone brings up their child. It is something quieter and more damaging than any of those things. It is the micro-expression of a man who is already calculating the redirect. Watch it once. Watch it twice. Come into the comments and tell me what you saw. Not what you think you should have seen, not what you want to be true, what you actually saw in those 3 seconds before the performance began. Because this community is built on that kind of honesty. It is built on the willingness to look at the footage directly and say what is actually there, not what the production wants you to take away from it, not what the narrative Kody constructed about himself would prefer you to see, not the comfortable binary that lets everyone off the hook. What is actually, documentably, observably there. That is what has made this audience extraordinary. And that is what Topic 17 is going to require. Because Topic 17 connects every thread we have pulled across this entire series into a single argument. Every pattern, every redirect, every attunement differential, every moment of truly erasure that the fandom documented in real time, every prediction this channel made that the subsequent footage confirmed. Topic 17 is the full picture, and you are going to want to be subscribed before it drops. So if you are not subscribed, do that right now. Hit the bell, because this is not a channel you want to find 3 videos late when the conversation has already moved somewhere you needed to be for from the start. Subscribe now. Share this video. Specifically, share it with anyone who still thinks the fandom was reading too much into editing choices. Anyone who still thinks truly erasure was an overreaction. Anyone who watched this show and felt something they could not quite name about Kody's relationship with his youngest daughter, but did not have the language for it yet. Send them this video. Let them find the language. Like this video if it gave you something to think about. Not because the metrics matter more than the conversation, they do not. But because the algorithm is the thing that decides whether this analysis reaches the people who need it. And you telling the algorithm that this content is worth distributing is the mechanism by which that happens. So, I like it. Share it, subscribe, and come into the comments. Tell me what you saw in those 3 seconds. Tell me if I missed something. Tell me what you think Topic 17 should address first. This is not a broadcast. This is a conversation. And the best conversations this channel has had have started in the comments section, with someone who noticed something the video didn't name precisely enough. Be that person. You have been an extraordinary audience. The door to Topic 17 is open. Walk through it.